Okay, so this week is our discussion on what we talked about last week of patience and how we maybe some examples of through the week that we've either had patience or not had patience, whatever the case may be. So, as a little reminder, last week we talked about patience and what biblical patience is, and we looked at a number of scriptures that each of us brought, and we learned why we should pray for patience. We understand patience biblically. So does anybody want to remind us what the definition of patience is?
The Webster's
The biblical definition.
well, what I got down is the ability to accept or tolerate, there's a key word on the second word, tolerate, something without getting angry.
Yeah, and that brings up another point of what the opposite of patience is anger and frustration and not tolerating whatever we're faced with. So does anyone want to share an experience from the past week of either patience or impatience that they thought of or experienced or observed from someone else?
Oh, from someone else. Okay. I was going to say, I have a laundry list of things.
Well, go.
Not about somebody else.
Well, that was just an option, either yourself or someone else. Just maybe somebody was very patient.
Well, I was not here last week, but I understand that we brought in verses
Yes.
on patience, and I have a couple. One is in somebody may have already brought this, I don't know. One is in James.
Somebody did, I remember.
James
me.
1, 2 through 3.
Oh, no,
No,
we
I
had James
brought.
5.
I did James
Oh.
5.
In James 1, it says, "Consider it all joy, my brother, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance."
So it's James, there's 1.
James 1, 2 through 3. Rabbi Russ Resnick wrote a really excellent article on the comparison between patience and persistence. That persistence is patience with feet on it.
Patience with what?
Yeah, persistence is patience with feet.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
And an example of that is in Luke 11. Luke 11, verse 8, beginning of verse 8. "I tell you, even if the friend will not get up and give him anything out of friendship, yet because of the man's persistence, he will get up and give him as much as he needs. So I say to you, ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened to you." This was in regards to, let me back up here a little bit, give you the full story. Yeshua said to them, "Which of you has a friend and will go to him in the middle of the night and say to him, 'Friend, lend me 3 loaves of bread, because a friend of mine has come to me on this journey and I have nothing to set before him.' And then from within he may answer, saying, 'Don't bother me, the door is already locked, and my children and I are in bed. I can't get up to give you anything.' I tell you, even if the friend will not get up and give him anything out of his friendship, yet because of the man's persistence, he will give up and give him as much as he needs."
That could just be an aggravating nudge that keeps knocking on the door.
Exactly.
Yeah.
True,
That's
but
exactly what it comes
the
down
man
to.
who was sleeping may not have had patience, but the one knocking on the door had patience.
That's true.
He
No,
had,
he was just obnoxious.
but his
Stop knocking.
but his persistence wore the other man down. You have to have
Well,
you have to have
just you want to
persistence
shut
to
him
patience to have persistence. What's that?
You just wanted to shut him up.
Well, exactly,
Get rid of him.
exactly.
Give him what he wants and let him go.
Yep, that's right. That's the way it is with kids sometimes. I know it's the way with the girls. You know, just shut them up. Give them what they want. Get them out of here. I'm tired.
Naughty.
Well, I know it's not the best option, but
That was
But-
not how I was raised.
our,
He wasn't either.
but patience. Boy, do they have patience to be able to just constantly haggle you about something that you don't want to do.
Or tenacity.
Tenacity, yes.
Fine line.
persistence. There is a fine line. There is a fine line, but persistence can be an aspect of patience. It could also be annoying.
Yet another?
Those are the two verses I have written down at the moment. Although I do have, excuse me, the example of Joseph. When you think of patience, the example of Joseph, and there are many examples of Joseph we can think of. Certainly, when he was in prison, that was, certainly an aspect of patience. But more than that, the testing of Joseph's brothers when they came to Egypt to buy food. When I think of the mind of Joseph and him missing his father, missing his family, he had already been separated from them for, at that point, around 21 years, something like that. It's been a long time. And I'm sure he yearned to be reunited with his father and with Benjamin. But he had a greater purpose, to test his brothers. He needed to find out, had his brothers really changed? Would his brothers honor their father's choice of Benjamin as the favored? He could have just revealed right away who he was and been reunited, but he had no proof whatsoever, no evidence of the change. So he had to send his brothers away. Talk about patience. We don't know how much time elapsed there, but he had to send his brothers away because he had a greater purpose, to test his brothers for the sake of restoring his family. How oftentimes do we get put in a situation somewhat similar, where we want things to happen right now, but God has a purpose. We may know it or we may not know it. Sometimes we don't know it.
Which is very frustrating at times.
Sure, it is. Absolutely. But I think it's important to recognize that we build up the soul trait of patience by keeping the purpose of what we are dealing with clearly before us. That when we recognize the goal that's ahead of us, that God has a purpose, God has a plan for these, that nothing happens outside of his will, then we can really begin to build up that soul trait of patience when we keep that in mind. It's when we become short-sighted and we want the answers now, we want the results now, we want the consequences now. We're a me right now, instant gratification society, but that's not the way God works.
One thing that I really had to learn to have patience is raising Johnny, because when he stutters and he gets excited, and I had to learn, because his speech therapist said, don't make him stop and start all over. That's the worst thing you can do.
That's a good example. Let's stop on that. Let's also think about the other midot we've already looked at, like humility, compassion, how those play into patience. Because it's something important as we go through this, we need to realize is how these midot feed into each other and how they build on each other, and that you really can't have one without the other because you can get unbalanced. You go through the extremes.
I had to learn to do that.
So in that situation, would you say you've also used compassion?
Yes, and compassion and everything, but I appreciate people here that has patience with him, because sometimes he does get on people's nerves when he gets excited and tries to tell you something. Sometimes it takes forever to get out. And so many people would say, well, Johnny, stop, start all over. And his speech therapist said, don't ever do that. I don't know why. I would think you would, but... So I learned not to do that. I let him go on, and sometimes I'm about ready to pull my hair out, but...
And maybe it's partly
But you
because,
learn to live with that, huh?
I'm wondering if it's partly because he's already frustrated because he knows he can't get it out fast enough.
Yeah.
So telling him to stop and start it again would just add to his frustration.
And some people get frustrated with him because he's only got the mind, they said, between 10 and 12 years old, his abilities and stuff. But people don't understand that because he's much older than that. But that requires he's going to have patience.
I think it's probably similar to those who have hearing loss.
Yeah.
Find it much easier to just act like you understand. I don't always have the greatest of hearing, and I know it drives people I know it kind of irks Lori a little bit because I don't have the greatest of hearing, and sometimes I have to go, huh? What? What? Say it again. And that can get annoying. And you don't want to see that. You don't want to see other people's reactions. You don't want people to get ticked off at you or frustrated at you. So it's easier to just go, okay, yeah, okay, yeah, it makes sense. And then you're really going, I have no idea what they just said, because you don't want to aggravate people. You don't want to be a nuisance. You don't want that hassle. So I think there's some similarity there that if you have to ask Johnny to start all over because of your impatience, then in his mind, he's thinking, wow, they're getting irritated at me, and it's only making it worse.
Yes. That's why you just gotta let him go, because he finally gets, if he only does that, when he reads from the Bible, he don't hardly ever, but it's when he gets excited, especially with the Denver Broncos. Oh my goodness. And of course, Leah's hard hearing too. Some of hers is selective hearing, I think.
Well, it's like
But
with my
she's hard
dad.
hearing.
My dad, he has tinnitus. And I have this really bad problem of when I get super excited, my mouth just goes. I can't stop. I'm so excited that all my words start running together. And my dad's just sitting there going, huh?
How do you do
What?
that?
So then I have to stop. I have to slow down. I'm like, okay, Dad, let me put this in a way you'll understand. I have to slow myself down. Well, now that I'm older and because of diabetes, I'm starting to have tinnitus really bad. So when there's people out there like me, they're I'm like, aha. So I've learned patience that way, try to get my point across.
Does he have patience with you though? She's thinking. Come on.
Actually, yeah, for the most part he does. I mean, we can like bounce off of each other patient-wise. I do get irritated when I've asked him to do something like a year ago and he still hasn't done it. And I will remind him, and then I just back off and I'll wait another year or two. And,
Don't say it's on the list somewhere.
yeah, the list is. But yeah, the patients like with Johnny, I love him. I love him to pieces. And when he spent the night over the weekend, oh my gosh, that kid, I just love him. He's like right there. He's eager to help. If I start talking too fast, even with Johnny, I get that. I'm like, okay. Slow down, Heather. Let's do this again. Type thing. But yeah, I mean, it irritates me when people don't have that kind of patience. Foreigners with heavy accents. I will stop and I will take time and try to listen really hard and be very patient with them to see what they're saying, to understand them on that level. And then raising 2 kids of my own. God help me. Yeah. Patience is like a second nature with me now. And
I know when I watch the girls and have Chris there, sometimes you have 3 people, they're going to pick her, 3 kids.
yeah.
And then after a while, I just sat there and laughed at it, and then Sarah will start laughing because she likes to do that. She's funny, and she'll start laughing, and they're just fine. But if you get on to them, they don't make it worse. So I just sat there, and then they start laughing at each other.
So what about, when I think of patience, what about some of the different components of patience and how we interact with them? And what I mean is, I think a lot of the things that we're talking about here is interaction with one another and being patient and not becoming irritated or frustrated at a person's speech impediment or something along that line. But what about life circumstances and being patient, or another way of saying it would be contented in life circumstances with the lot that has been given to you? And I think on some level that requires patience of us, that God knows what he's doing, that it may not happen in the time that we want, whether it's, maybe you're looking for a spouse, maybe somebody's looking for a spouse and they're like, Lord, when's the right spouse going to come along? When's the right person going to come along? Or, maybe some people are trying to have children and Lord, it hasn't happened yet. What's going on here? And You become impatient because you want the results now. Or maybe the new phone came out and you want to upgrade to the newest phone. Not mention any names or anything, but
I've been praying for patience regularly for years. I was very active, very outdoors, and then I found myself not being able to walk, and I needed a lot of help. It was always, I needed patience and guidance in this issue, or patience and understanding. I don't pray for patience as much anymore. Now I'm praying that I can just accept where I'm at and be happy right now, today, no matter how horrible it is. It just to be content and happy. And I've just kind of moved from being patient to being content. And that's kind of what I've heard from listening online.
Well, that is patience. That is patience. It's being not so focused on yourself in the situations you're in, but just trusting God to take care of you and lead your steps. Like Obadiah that we looked at Saturday. The guy felt frustrated and abandoned because he didn't have any control over the situation. And he had to learn that, God had it all under control and it was in God's timing that it would all be taken care of. I think that is patience, being content with where God has you.
Hurry up with his timing.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I need to learn to be happy.
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. Part of patience is finding contentment in today, and not trying to reach for what tomorrow brings, but to just find contentment in our life today and what God has planned for us today. And it doesn't mean that we don't plan for tomorrow.
No, I can't stop
but
trying to achieve,
right,
trying to grow, but I have to realize I'm not doing it like I used to.
right, yeah, absolutely.
So last week we started with the verse in Galatians, and where Paul lists out the fruits of the Spirit, and patience is among them. So what can that tell us about patience and how we can achieve it and grow in it if it's a fruit of the Ruach?
Well, one thing I've noticed with patience is that ultimately the way we respond to it has to do with our trust of God.
Yes.
And responding to the Holy Spirit means we have to trust God. And I think that's why a lot of people struggle with being patient, because somewhere in the back of their mind, they figure, oh, I must have done something wrong, so God's not moving as fast as I would want. Or if there's a goal someone's working towards achieving and it's not happening soon enough, they figure that for some reason God's going to let them down, and there's not that trust in God. And so they become impatient, waiting for the end result.
I would say that's partially because we have to learn that the Father is not like, Scripture says that the Father's not like a man. And the issue is that if we have been let down in our lives as a norm, if you will, and then we have to learn to trust the Father that He's different than that. When He's said, okay, I'm going to give you this, this, and this, and we're waiting for Him to cause those things to manifest, sometimes it's very hard to be patient because our experience tells us it's just like everything else.
That was one of the things that Rabbi Russ had alluded to, was that impatience is oftentimes associated with a lack of control, a feeling of a lack of control over yourself. That to have patience is ultimately to release the control over your own life and leave it into the hands of God, and to trust that He knows what He's doing. Because to grab to try to grab a hold of life circumstances in your life and try to be in control of it, and try to control the outcome, can oftentimes lead to impatience, because we don't always have control. We can only control what we do. We can't control what other people do and the consequences of those things. But we can trust that God is in control, that all things work for those who are in Him. All things work to their good.
You know, all these people that's been looking for jobs, they would have to lose patience somewhat. You know, when you keep looking, you keep getting turned down, that would be hard to have patience. on
I
something
guarantee
like
you
that.
it sucketh.
Huh?
I guarantee you it sucketh.
And then having patience, hoping your kids one day goes this way instead of this way. You know, gets on the
Which
right
way
track.
instead of what way?
Instead goes this way instead of this way.
What's that way?
Not quite where you want them to go.
One of the fruits of the Spirit is long suffering and patience, gentleness,
Check.
and Galatians.
There's 3 of them back there.
Seems like maybe it's that progressive. Not if you're not long suffering, you won't be gentle. You won't have faith, or you won't have goodness. Like it's a combination of meekness and temperance.
Well, yeah, I mean, think of the opposite of patience, of anger. When you're angry, can you have any of those other fruits of the Spirit at the same time, like love and joy and peace?
I guess you can't have a righteous anger. You know.
Yeah,
it's seldom, I would
I'm talking
think.
about the opposite of patience, anger.
The anger that is a sinful anger.
Well, the anger that leads to sin, of impatience, of saying things that you regret. It's not very loving, not very kind.
That more often than not, those who are in the flesh, it's a rare situation to find that you have righteous anger.
Yes.
Usually it's anything but righteous. Doesn't mean it can't happen. I mean, obviously, Yeshua had righteous anger, and we find examples of the apostles who had righteous anger. But I would say certainly the vast majority of the time in our own lives, our anger is not righteous anger. It's a lack of patience.
I think a lot of people driving